Sunday, we kicked off a brand new series called Greater Than. If you want to kind of look in the middle of your worship folder and grab your message outline and follow along, I want you to think about something today. The Bible teaches us that when Jesus walked on earth, they didn't have lights and sound systems like we have here. Did you know that? But they had their own understanding of a certain type of natural technology. Frequently, when Jesus was teaching in an area, what he would do is he would go down by the water. Sometimes Jesus would get in the boat, and he'd be out in the water on the boat, and he'd push offshore just a little bit so that the sound of his voice, the sound waves, if you will, would reflect off the water. And frequently there were hills that kind of formed like a natural amphitheater. And so with the sound bouncing off the water and the sound being contained in the amphitheater, Jesus' voice would carry, and he would be teaching. And so one day Jesus is out on the water. He's in a boat, something like the one that will be up on the screen. He's in a boat that's a little bit like that. And he's just teaching. How many of you have ever spent any time on a boat? You've been out on a cruise ship, you've been on a ski boat, you've been on a pontoon, you've been on a dinghy, a rowboat, a sea-doo. Good number of you. Now, most of the time in American culture, when we think of time on the water and time in a boat, it involves a lot of things. For instance, for some of you, it involves this. There is nothing absolutely better than being out on a boat on a hot day. You've got the wind in your hair, you've got a cold drink in your hand, and you're just cruising along and you're having an entire blast. You've got a little Bob Marley or a little Jimmy Buffett going on in the background. Having that cooler just makes your day complete, right? Now for others of you, it involves a little different activity. We got any fisher people in here? We got some ladies in the back. Cool. You know, fishing's not like it used to be, though, by the way. You know, this is a pretty decent rod and reel, and some of us go out there. When I was a kid growing up, I fished in a lot of the ponds and lakes in southern Ohio. And when I was younger, I started out with a cane pole. And it would go about 4 or 5 feet out in the water, and I'd catch some bluegill and some bass. And then I got a little bit older, and I got a Zebco rod and reel and thought I'd arrive. Nowadays, people go out on a boat like that, and they've got fancy fishing gear, they've got sonar, they got all that. It costs like $5,000 per pound of fish, but you're having a blast, right? Now, as I got older, we spent a lot of time out on the lake almost every weekend. My aunt had a couple of different boats, and we loved it. And there came the point in time when I learned to ski. Some of you understand water skiing, whether you're doing slalom or you're doing the 2 feet one. I never actually became a good water skier, but I had a blast spending 3 or 4 hours at a time having people circle the boat around me because I was the center of attention. But some of you have done that. But I'm also well aware that this is Arizona. We're not a particularly water-heavy state. And some of you are scared to death of the water. If you thought you were going to go out on a lake today, you put this on when you got in the shower that morning, just to practice. And the whole time you were out on that boat, you'd be sitting somewhere back in the back, like the lady back there, and you'd have this on and you're clutching it. And the wind's in your hair, the cold drink's in your hand, but you're not having the greatest time in your life. You're a little bit fearful. You're a little bit scared. And as soon as that boat gets back into the dock or back on the ground, you're like kissing the ground and hugging the ground because you're glad to be there. And there are all kinds of things in life that make us fearful. There are numerous things that we experience and numerous things that we don't experience. In fact, the French philosopher, Michel de Montaigne, he said, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which have never happened." And that's how it is with fear, folks. Most of the things that we worry about never happen. For instance, how many of you in this room are old enough to remember Y2K? Good number of you. You know, if you remember Y2K and all the scary stuff that was supposed to happen, and all the power grids were probably going to go off, and nobody would have any power, and all the computers were going to crash, and the sky was going to fall in, and it was going to be Y2 chaos, right? Some of you maybe are still drinking bottled water that you stored away for Y2K, because there's never going to be any water. What's the number one weapon of terrorists? Right, it's not bombs. It's not backpacks going into train stations. It's not planes flying in the skyscrapers. It's fear, most of which never happens. Now, we all have fear in life. For instance, do any of you know in the United States what the number one professed fear is? Public speaking. That's right. Some of you would never stand up here and do something like this, or stand in front of a classroom, or at a conference, or a seminar. But there's another type of fear that relates to speaking. Some of you have the fear of speaking into a difficult conversation. Some of you have a fear of insignificance. Some of you have a fear of financial failure. Some of you have a fear of actually making a difficult decision. Heard recently about a little guy, 5 years old. He's getting ready to go off to kindergarten. He's up and he's getting ready that first day, and there's just weeping and crying and screaming and sobbing. And finally, the little guy looks at his mom and says, "Relax, it's only 3 hours." We have all these different fears. And so it's not surprising to me that the most repeated command from God in the Bible is fear not. That's right. Do not be afraid, the Bible says time after time. And in Mark chapter 4, the disciples are in a very fearful mode. They've been out in the boat, and they're clinging to a life vest. They're scared. But out in that boat with them, as that story would play out, is Jesus. And Jesus isn't clinging to a life vest. Jesus is clinging to a pillow. Jesus is tired. He's been hanging out with church people all day, and they drain you. He has been teaching. He has been calling out. As a matter of fact, remember I told you that Jesus would go out into the water sometimes on a little boat to carry it? In this particular instance, in the Gospel of Mark chapter 4, Jesus never even went back into the seashore. He had the Bible, he had the disciples come out and get in the boat with him. Now, they've been interacting with big crowds, and they're getting ready to go off and rest. And when I tell you they went out and they got in a boat, it wasn't like they got on a Norwegian cruise line, big cruise ship. It wasn't like they got on some fancy yacht. It wasn't like they were on some boat that had been christened across the bottom, Messiah 1. They were on a little fishing boat that was popular today, that was big enough for about 13 men and some fish. It's a beautiful day. They're out there cruising across the water when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a giant storm erupts. And the disciples are scared. And they're panicking. The disciples begin to scream at one another. The disciples are screaming and Jesus is sleeping. The disciples are panicking and Jesus is napping. And the disciples are all tore up because some of them were fishermen. They've heard the stories about these big storms. They're called cosmic seismos. They've heard the stories about the number of boats that went out and never came back. They've heard the stories about the number of fishermen who were their friends, maybe some of their relatives who were on those boats, that are lying at the bottom of the very water that they're sailing in. The waves are crashing, the wind is blowing, the spray is in their face, the waves are coming over the sides of the boats. They're trying to scoop the water out, and they're panicked. And Jesus is sleeping. And the disciples are angry with Jesus because this whole boat trip was Jesus' idea anyway. It wasn't their idea. And finally, in the midst of their frustration, in the midst of their anger, in the midst of their panic, the disciples go back and they wake Jesus. And they say, "Lord, don't you care? Don't you care that we're about to drown?" Now, anybody who's lived very long has asked God that same question. Some of you asked him that question this past week. Some of you have asked him that question over the past 6 months when the storms and the winds and the spray and the waves were rocking your world. They were rocking your boat. Lord, don't you care? My marriage is going to be the marriage that went the distance. My marriage is going to be the example for my children and my grandchildren and for my neighbors. Now I'm learning about all the lies, about all the deceit, about the infidelity, and my marriage is going south and breaking up. Lord, don't you care? Lord, don't you care that my relative used to come into my room in the middle of the night and do those horrible things to me? God, don't you care? Where were you, God, when my 15-year-old began partying, began experimenting with drugs and alcohol, came home drunk last night? Where were you, God? Don't you care? God, don't you care that I've got a family to feed and a mortgage to pay? And my company is having troubles, and I've heard that I'm probably going to get laid off or downsized, and I'm facing financial calamity. God, don't you care? God, don't you care that my retirement years were supposed to be my best years, and now there's been a stroke, there's been cancer, there's been a heart attack? God, where are you? Don't you care? God, don't you care? We had prayed for that pregnancy. We had prayed for that baby. We were so joyful, and now there's bad news. Now there's a possible miscarriage. God, don't you care? Some of you in this room this morning, in the past several weeks, in the past several months, have experienced hurricane-like storm conditions in your own life, in your marriage, in your finances, in your parenting, in your relationships, in your career. The disciples are out there in that little boat, and the winds are howling, and the waves are rocking, and the rain is falling, and the waves are crashing over the sides of the boat, and the disciples are terrified. And they go back and they wake Jesus up, and Jesus wakes up and he's clutching his pillow. He's wiping the sleep from his eyes, trying to get his bearings. Jesus feels the boat rocking, and he sees the wind and the waves and the storm and the effects, and he kind of steps forward and he gathers his feet and he looks out across the sea and he says, "Peace, be still." And immediately, the storm stops. Now, the beauty in all of this isn't that the storm stopped, because all storms eventually pass, right? It was that it stopped at the sound of his voice. See, this miracle wasn't that they rode into the eye of the storm and they had respite for a few minutes and they had time to gather themselves before they went back out and went through the rest of the storm. It wasn't that Jesus said those words and the storm started eventually just kind of fading away and the thunder roared a little less, and the lightning flashed a little less, and the rain began to dissipate gradually until it just kind of faded away. The miracle in all of this is at the sound of his voice, the storm stopped instantly. And the disciples are looking around. And Mark tells us that Jesus looked at these disciples and he said, "Gentlemen, have you learned nothing? Why are you so afraid? Where is your faith?" And then the disciples asked Jesus a very telling question. I think it's a question that our culture is actually asking in these days and these times. I think it's a question that everyone who calls themselves a follower of Jesus should regularly revisit intermittently throughout the course of their lives. It's in your outline. It's on the screen in Mark chapter 4, verse 41. Here's the question. The disciples were absolutely terrified, and here it is. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey?" Who is this man? Who is this man that isn't afraid of the storm? Who snaps during a hurricane? Who has the kind of faith to stand up and rebuke the storm? Who is this man that in the midst of a mega-seismos type of storm doesn't hold up a life jacket, he curls up with a pillow? Who is this man? That question is maybe the most important question you'll ever ask in your entire life. Now here's what's interesting. A few minutes earlier, the disciples were terrified of the storm. Now standing here in this moment, the disciples are terrified of Jesus. Who is this man? In American culture, When we ask that question, we rarely go to scenes like the one that we just played out for you here this morning. American culture, we have a tendency to answer that question by going to Christmas. See, every year at Christmas, we kind of ask that same question. When we talk about the fact that Jesus was born on Christmas Day, and we do candlelight services, and we have nativity scenes, and we sing great Christmas carols like Silent Night. And you ever really think about the lyrics of Silent Night? We're singing that song, and then towards the end it says, Christ the Savior is. And in our humanity, even our well-intentioned love of Jesus and support of who He is, why He came, and how He came, I don't know if you've ever thought about it or not, but when we do that, we think about Christ, the little baby. We think about the nativity scene. We think about the little animals, and there He is wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And that becomes our mindset of Jesus. But that's not really who He is. When understanding who the Christ child actually is, and who the Christ child is prior to arriving on earth in physical form, in flesh, the Apostle Paul actually gives us great clarity on this. And in the book of Colossians, Paul says this: Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. Now check this out. Some of you have never read this. He existed before anything was created, and He is supreme over all creation. For through Him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we cannot see, such as thrones and kingdoms and rulers and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through Him and for Him. He existed before anything else, and here it is, and He holds all of creation together. Who is this man that the winds and waves obey? Who is this man who steps through a storm? This man is the God who spoke creation and the whole world into existence. He is the one who holds all of creation together. This is the man who created the world out of nothing. Now sometimes we say here in life that we create things from scratch. Like for instance, my mom loves to cook and bake. And my mom sometimes will say, I'm going to make some cookies from scratch. Now, I don't argue with her, but she's really not. She has ingredients. My mom has flour, and she has sugar, and chocolate chips go in everything, right? Because that's in the Bible. But she didn't make it from scratch. She used original ingredients to create cookies from it. Sometimes you'll talk to a builder, and they'll say, well, I'm going to go over here, we're going to build these homes from scratch. No, you aren't. You have lumber, you have water, you have concrete, you have steel, you have other human beings. You're taking the instruments and the tools and the raw materials that you have, and you're using them to build something. But don't kid yourself. You're not building anything from scratch. Most of you in this room, or many of you in this room anyway, know that I'm a big college football fan. And at the end of every year, I actually get caught up in what's called the coaching carousel. Our coach gets fired over here and hired over there and all of that. And every once in a while, some big name coach will move from one program to the other. And it's been a program that's going through a tough time. And you'll hear him say these words on ESPN. Well, I'm looking forward to going back and working with this program. It's a great university, and I like the fact that I can take the challenge. I can accept the challenge of building this program from scratch. And I want to scream at ESPN going, no, he's not! He's got players. They have helmets. They have football. They have a field. They have boosters pouring millions of dollars into this program. They're not building it from scratch. They're using materials that's already provided for them. And here's what I want you to understand. Inventors and scientists can make all kinds of things, but they can't make something out of nothing. It'd be great if they could. Imagine that some inventor, some scientist found a way for you and me to look at our old Beamer car and say, make it a Jaguar until it loves. Or your kid brings home the report card in a few weeks and it's got D's on it, and you go, make them straight A's. Well, we can't do that. But Jesus can. You see, it's out of nothing that this man whom the winds and waves obey speaks the whole world into existence. And the one who calms this mega storm, the one who created the world, is the same one who holds the world together. And He's the God of wonders. He's the Lord of all creation. Sometimes when you and I are in the midst of our own storms in life, sometimes we seem to forget just how big and how powerful and how mighty and how awesome and how wonderful God really is. I was reading just recently that a couple months ago in May, Disney announced that they were going to release later this year a remake of a movie that was very, very popular about 30 years ago called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Some of you heard that movie, watched it on Netflix. There's a remake coming out later this year. But if you remember at least the original movie, there's a character actor by the name of Rick Moranis, and he's kind of a scientist guy, a little bit of a nerdy kind of guy, and he decides that he's going to create this machine. And this machine is going to be able to shrink things. And while he's testing it and messing with it, he accidentally shoots his kids and shrinks his kids. And now his children are microscopic size. And I'm thinking, I'd like to have a tool like that. I mean, imagine all of the practical things we could do with it. In my case, honey, I shrunk my gut. Or some of you got, honey, I shrunk our mortgage. Honey, I shrunk the mouth of our screaming child. You know what I'm talking about, right? It'd be a very, very cool thing to have. And here's the deal. Ever since the beginning of time, hear me, ever since the beginning of time, people have been trying to shrink God to miniature size, something that they can hold, they can identify with, something they can manage, and in some of our cases, something we can control. You don't believe me? We do it all the time. I have a pastor friend named Gene, and Gene had a set of neighbors who were very involved in the Catholic Church. And these neighbors were great people and wonderful friends. And they had this little, 6-year-old son. As they say where I come from, he was all boy. He was ornery, he was energetic, he was cute, he was active, he was into everything. And one day, Gene's neighbor was telling him when they came home from Mass that they were talking about the respective church services. He says, the neighbor said, our Mass got real interesting today. And my friend said, how so? And he said, you know our son? He said, yeah. He said, well, we're sitting there in Mass and we're going through our liturgy, and my son's real fidgety and real active, and he's making a little bit of commotion. And so to calm him down, he said, my wife gave him our rosary, just to kind of get something in his hands to take his mind off of whatever it was that was creating all of that. And he said, before they knew it, their little boy had jumped up on the back of the pew, and in a voice loud enough for the whole church to hear, started swinging that rosary bead like a lasso and going, hang on, Jesus, you're going for a ride! And swung it across the crowd. Come back to me. And sometimes what we do, even in expressions of genuine faith, sometimes we try to shrink God down to something like a necklace, or a figurine, or a set of beads. Sometimes we try to shrink God down to a nativity scene, or a pane of stained glass in a window, or a picture on a wall. Because if we can do that, we make this God who is greater than everything, this God of wonders, this Lord of all creation, we shrink him down and we make him very manageable, very controllable. And we do these things, and we don't necessarily think about it, but when we do that, then all of a sudden, God is not nearly as big as we thought he was. Sometimes we want to shrink God down to a church building with a steeple on it or a cross hanging on it. And we keep God small, we keep Him boxed in. Sometimes you and I feel more comfortable with the God that we can shrink, manage, and control. But here's what I want you to understand. God is the most shrink-resistant entity in the universe. God has no equal. He's the God of all creation, and He is bigger than and more powerful than and greater than anything you and I will ever dream or imagine, than any roadblock we can ever put in front of Him, than any storm that will ever consume us, than anything in our lives that would ever try and separate us from Him. Now, in the Bible, typically when God appeared among a group of people, those people then go like, oh, cool, God's here, and pull out their iPhones and start filming Him. Typically, the response when God appeared on the scene in a very demonstrative way, the typical response was fear. It was terror. 150 times the Scripture uses this phrase, the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord. You're like, time out, David. Wait just a minute. Didn't you just tell us a few minutes ago that God says, do not be afraid, David? Is the Bible contradicting itself? 150 times, the fear of the Lord. The Bible's not contradicting itself, folks. When you really figure out who this man is, the one whom all of nature obeys, there is this sobering reverence and awe that sets in, and you have this holy fear, this holy respect, this divine understanding. And God doesn't want that you to move away from Him in those moments. He wants to draw you to Himself in those moments. And so right away, when God steps on the scene, He says, fear not. I am the Lord your God. I am here to help. I am here to love. I am here to support. I am here to save. And friends, that's why Jesus Christ left heaven and came to earth. See, God wanted to get small enough not to be feared, but to be known, to be loved. The Bible says it is perfect love that casts out all fear. Now, it's right here in the midst of this point, of this part of this conversation, that you and I have to wrestle with two questions before we leave here this morning. Question number one is this. It's there in your outline. Have you admitted yet that you need this God? You need the God that the winds and the waves obey. See, about the only thing the disciples got right when they were terrified is this. They admitted their need for God. They admitted that they were in trouble. They needed God to intervene in their circumstances. They needed the God who was greater than their fears. And I think some of you in this room are there, and it surprises you. 6 months ago, a year ago, you would never have thought about spiritual things. Over the years in pastoral ministry, I've had this type of conversation countless times, and I absolutely love it. I'll get done speaking on some Sunday morning, and I'll walk out in the lobby, and some guy will come walking up to me and say, "Hey, David, I'm the last person you ever think I'd ever be in church. But I lost a bet, and somebody drugged me here this morning. But God kind of ambushed me." And I say, God's got this big sense of humor, I'm guessing, because He was talking to me, and I'm not really a God talk kind of guy. But David, I don't have much of a history of being interested in spiritual things. I'm not really a religious person, but any chance you and I could grab a cup of coffee or have lunch this week? Because I have some questions about God. Now, whenever I get asked a question like that, I assume they're lying, so I always say yes. And we'll get to talking. And they'll say, you know what? I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm sitting there having lunch with the pastor, talking about spiritual things, asking questions about God. And then they say this phrase, that's not like me. And you know what I do in that moment? I affirm them. They're right. It's not like them. But what happens, folks, in all of our lives is we reach a point where instead of always fighting God, we start wrestling with the question internally, who is this man? And then these folks, they begin to recognize that he's the God of all creation, and he's greater than our sin, he's greater than our fear, he's greater than our hurts, and he's greater than our grief, and he's greater than our past, and I need him. And I would imagine that that's the course that some of you are on, and very soon you're going to reach out to him. Whether it's a hurt, a habit, a hang-up, an addiction, whether it's a fear or a realm of grief or a personal need in your life, you're going to invite God to come into your life. You're going to ask him to be your friend and your forgiver and the leader of your life. In fact, as a matter of fact, before we even go into question number 2, I want you to bow your heads. Whether it's you've never really looked God in the eye and asked him to come into your life and be your forgiver, your leader, your Lord. Or maybe you found yourself crying out to God recently in the midst of pain and heartache and disappointment and crying out, God, where are you? Don't you care? There comes a point in our lives, whether it's for the issue of salvation or some storm we're going through, when we have to come face to face and admit our need for God. If you're here this morning and you want to admit that you have a need for God, the God who is greater than your sin or the storm or your struggles, would you just lift your hand up and back down? That's all you got to do. Let me pray for you. Let me pray for you. Up and back down. Yeah. Every section. Almost every row. God, you saw every hand. You know every need. Some of the hands that went up, God, were crying out because they're in a storm. Their families being tossed and turned like the little SS Minnow. Their hearts are breaking. Their lives are shattering. It could be a troubled marriage. It could be difficult finances. It could be a recent health issue. It could be a financial setback, a career issue, a boss they don't like, and a boss who doesn't like them. God, right now, at the sound of your voice, would you rebuke that storm in their life? Would you grip their hearts? They're calling out to you, admitting their need for something that's greater than they can contribute to, and it's beyond them, and they need you, Jesus. And then Jesus, there were some other folks out there who raised their hand. They're saying, I'm coming face to face with Jesus. I can't even believe I'm sitting here this morning, much less raising my hand. But Jesus, I need you. I need you to come into my life. I need you to forgive my sin. I need you to become my friend, my leader, and my Lord. And if that's you right now, in the privacy of your mind, you don't have to do anything out loud. Would you repeat after me? Lord Jesus, I need you. I need you to come into my heart. I need you to wash away my sin. And by the power of your blood, make me clean. Here this morning, August 18th, 2019, Connect Church. Jesus, I ask you to be my forgiver, my friend, my leader, my Lord. And by your power and none of my own, I pledge to follow you the rest of my days, through the good ones and the bad ones. Thank you, Jesus. I pray this in your name. Amen. Now, for any of you who prayed any kind of prayer along with me, whether it's asked Jesus into your life or the storm that you're in, if you need a little additional prayer, you need someone to talk with, we have prayer partners who will be up here to close with the service. They'd love to pray with you a little bit more personally than I was able to right now, or maybe hear a little bit of your story and pray specifically about your situation. But there comes a point in our lives where all of us have to admit that we have a need for God. It's God who is greater than whatever it is we're experiencing. There's a second question there that we have to answer this morning, and it's this. Will you move in faith toward the very thing that you fear? Will you move in faith toward the very thing that you fear? In Psalm chapter 46, we read these words, God is our refuge and strength, and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. This is the psalmist crying out to God, talking to us about the struggles that we go through in life, the things that we're dealing with. That's why you have two groups of people. They have the same situation in life. One sees it through eyes of fear, the other sees it through eyes of faith. Two people look at the storm. One of them grabs a life vest. The other one grabs a pillow. How is that so? It's because they grasp what's going on here that the psalmist is saying on our behalf. And so then it comes down to this question. This question can go either way in any one of our lives. It's what if? We can take that question, we can say, what if God is greater than? What if? And we go in that direction, and we can say all these other what ifs. What if another storm comes? And what if my marriage doesn't make it? And what if this really is cancer? You see the difference from the same two words, but it's a matter of faith or a matter of fear? Most of the time, when God says in the Bible, do not fear, do not be afraid, God's not saying, hey, here's what I want you to do. I want you to sit on the sofa, chill out, relax, have another Pepsi. When God says, do not fear, He's really asking people to take on an adventuresome step of faith towards the object of their fear. And humanly speaking, that's scary. And it's the process, because we come to that defining moment of truth when we have to decide if we're going to let fear paralyze us or if we're going to allow ourselves to be propelled and moved in faith towards that fear. And it's really, really important. Kind of made a little list of some things. If you really believe that God is an ever-present help in the time of trouble, what would you start walking toward today? When you walk out of these doors, out into the parking lot, and back out into real life, if you really believe this, what would you walk toward? Maybe you'd walk towards the concerns in your career. So you're afraid that your performance doesn't meet the expectations of your company. You're in conflict with a coworker or with a supervisor, and you're not really operating in your strengths. Or maybe you start walking more towards this church, that you would finally jump in and let go of what used to be and begin to help create what can become in the A5205. Maybe you'd walk towards a hurt, a habit, a hang-up, an addiction. And you'd muster enough courage to connect with one of our connection groups, one of our small groups, one of our prayer partners, and begin asking for help because you know that something inside of you is bigger than you, but God is greater than the something inside of you. Maybe you're afraid that you're really sick right now. You got these funky feelings going on, but you won't go to the doctor because you're afraid to know if it's true or not. And yet we all know that the early detection is the best form of treatment. Can you walk out those doors and move in faith toward that? Maybe you're wrestling with a big decision, and you've prayed and you saw others, but now you still have to make the decision to pull the trigger and make it happen. Maybe it's a marriage issue or a family issue, and you're afraid of the pain of confrontation. You're afraid it's going to, the mess that it's going to open up. Or maybe God's asking you to take the next step, move to the next level in your spiritual journey, in your relationship with Him. And you need to deepen your walk with God, but that means that it's going to involve some spiritual discipline on your part. Maybe God's asking you to begin tithing and you're wrestling with that. God's asking you to get involved with others in a small group, a connection group, and you're wrestling with that. Maybe He's asking you to serve in a ministry and you don't want to make time for that. Maybe He's asking you to go out those doors and fix a relationship and you're afraid of that. Very, very important phrase right there in your outline. It's the whole key idea to the disciples asking Jesus, don't you care? And it's this: moving from fear-based living to faith-based living always involves taking a courageous step. Faith isn't faith until it acts. Or, if you're anything like me, faith isn't faith until it takes a risk on God. Some of us in this room, right here this morning, are living in a storm, and the storm is all you can see. And as you look through the storm, I implore you, do not shrink God down. I encourage you to see the God of all creation. In the Old Testament, there's a story about the children of Israel who had kind of been doing some vagabond living, and they'd been defeated in battle, and they were taken captive, and they were living among some pagan people. And in this story, the pagan people had kind of shrunk God down to all these little idols and all these little statues and all these little things. And they used sticks and shrubs and all kinds of stuff to make these little idols of God. And in the process, Israel had a chance to actually minister to them about the God that they had served. But what they did is they got scared to tell them about this God and about His greatness. And so what they did is they allowed them to go ahead and shrink God down. God begins to speak in this situation, and He gets hold of the heart and mind of one of the diehard prophets of the day, a guy named Jeremiah. And here's what God says. Tell them this, the stick God who made nothing, neither sky nor earth, will come to nothing on the earth and under the sky. But it is God whose power made the earth, whose wisdom gave shape to the world, who crafted the cosmos. He thunders and rain pours down. He sends the clouds soaring. He embellishes the storm with lightning. He launches wind from His warehouse. Now, if you were to go on and read the surrounding verses, you would find the context talking about this God who creates everything, and how these pagan people had shrunk down little statues of imaginary gods, and the Israelites had kind of got sucked into that and were kind of working with their own idol worship. And God's reminding them through the prophet Jeremiah, hey, I am the unshrinkable God. I am the God that you cannot manage. I am the God that you cannot control. I am the God that you cannot put in a place, put in a space, make a statue, make an idol, put on a necklace, and be greater than. I am the God who is greater than anything you're ever going to face or imagine. I am the God who wants to do more in your life. Hey, Israel, I want you to tell a whole country, I am. Some of you might recognize the name Rick Husband. Rick Husband was the commander of the Space Shuttle Columbia. And just by mentioning that, some of you remember that while they had a successful 16-day mission, the Space Shuttle Columbia was absolutely destroyed when it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere on February 1st, 2003. Some of you even know where you were when that happened. And as they re-entered the atmosphere, it was destroyed, and all 7 astronauts on board were killed. Now, what NASA had back then is NASA had a program, because they were up there in space and using the technology that was available. NASA would pipe in a song every morning to wake the astronauts from their sleep, because the astronauts couldn't tell exactly when it was daylight, when it was dark. And each day, one of the astronauts or their family members could request whatever song. And on day 6, it was Rick's turn, and his wife picked out a song to serve as the wake-up call. It was a song that was very popular back then, and the lyrics were sung and written by a guy named Steve Green. And the lyrics said, Lord of all creation, water, earth, and sky, the heavens are your tabernacle. Glory to the Lord on high. God of wonders. Now this is an astronaut being awakened to this. God of wonders. Beyond all galaxies. How appropriate would that be? And as the song played and the astronauts were waking up, it's followed by the voice from NASA, and it said these words, Good morning, Red Team. After outstanding work yesterday, we're really looking forward to the challenges before us today. This music was provided this morning for Rick. At which point, Rick Husband began to reply, Good morning, Linda. We appreciate the great words, and we're looking out the window, and you can really tell He is a God of wonders, and we sure appreciate being able to look out and enjoy the view. We're looking forward to another great day in space. And they had that other great day in space. In fact, they had 10 more of them. They just never returned from space. And if you remember that scene, you also remember that because of that song and a personal relationship that Rick Husband shared with the vocalist Steve Green, that Steve Green was being interviewed on the news by Connie Chung. And she was asking him about Rick, and he said, oh, Rick was a great guy. Rick, from the time he was born, had a very scientific mind. He always wanted to explore things and learn about things and find out things. That's what drove him to become an astronaut. And yet there was this aspect of faith, this aspect of God that Rick grasped with this childlike persona. And between the time that song had been sung and the Space Shuttle Columbia was destroyed, from space, Rick Husband sent an email to Steve Green. And here's what he said to Steve Green in that email just a couple of days before he died. He said, looking out the window of the shuttle, my eyes fill with tears as I marvel at God's creation. If there is a story, then there's a storyteller. If there is a work of art, there is an artist. And as you and I are here this morning, maybe reliving those scenes in the news, Rick Husband is sitting with that artist face to face. Who is this man? Even the winds and the waves obey. Folks, he is the God of all creation. He is the God who is greater than our fears, and he is the God who created this world out of nothing. And when you're going through a storm, and when the winds blow, the waves crash, and the fear is rising, and you're clinging to a life jacket for the rest of your life, you can move from the life jacket to the pillow because God is so much greater than the storm. God is so much greater than your fears. He's so much greater than your trials and your struggles and your addictions and your hurts and your habits. God's just simply greater than. And so, Father, we cry out to you. You are the Lord of all creation, the one who created water, earth, and sky. You dwell in the heavens, and you reside in our hearts. God, we thank you that you are greater than anything we will face, anything that we will dream, anything that we will go through. God, we repent for the times that we shrink you down to things that we can manage. We mean well by having symbols that in our minds represent you, but sometimes we get more attached to the symbols than we do to you. And we forget that we are the walking witness of your goodness and your greatness. God, we absolutely love you. Thank you for being greater than life's difficulties, storms, troubles, and trials. We love you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Creation.
honor the God of wonders right now. Just say thank you, Jesus. Hey, folks, we appreciate you being here. Remember, if you are able to help stack the chairs in your row, we appreciate it. The offering baskets towards the rear. God bless us, keep us, use us. We adore you, Lord. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. We'll see you next Sunday, folks. Have a great week.